Right now, we're joined by Rob Weinhold, a public security expert on the phone who we've talked to at length about this case. Rob, how are you?
I'm well. How are you today, Lynn?
Good. So, Rob, we just learned all charges dropped against the remaining officers charged in the Freddie Gray case, Garrett Miller, Alicia White, William Porter. What was your reaction to this news?
Well, given the track record of prosecution, to me, it's not a surprise at all. The last time that we spoke, Lynn, in the studio with the last verdict, we were questioning, how do we even move forward, meaning the state's attorney's office. And so I think most people would say, what took so long? If you go back to the initial stages where charges were filed, there was a lot of questions about an independent investigation and whether or not the right protocols were followed and so on and so forth. And I think that ultimately weakened the stance of the state's attorney's office as it relates to the charges. And so for me, it's not a surprise. As we talked about before, the officers are going to have to undergo an administrative proceeding at this point. But, I think most people are probably scratching their heads going, wow, what took so long?
Could you tell us a little bit more about that administrative proceedings? What could happen next to them, even though these trials are over?
Well, there's an independent investigation underway, and that is an internal investigation now that the criminal proceedings are over, more administrative in nature, where the department is apparently solicited the help of an outside agency, that being the Montgomery County Police Department, to really understand the facts and circumstances around this case in detail, determine whether or not each officer's actions were in alignment with the policies and protocols that are in place, and if not, they could face departmental charges. At that point, there's a process that's followed in and around and up to and including a trial board, but ultimately the outcome of these officers' careers, whether or not they remain with the Baltimore Police Department, is really going to be in the hands of the police commissioner.
As a former Baltimore City police officer, because obviously law enforcement watching these cases and these trials very, very closely, could you talk about maybe the reactions or feelings among law enforcement right now, given all these charges being dropped?
Well, I think it's a day where no one really celebrates a victory. You have officers who have been charged, their careers disrupted and possibly destroyed. You have Freddie Gray, who is dead. You have a family that's in mourning. You have a city that's been torn apart. I think there's some positives that have come from all of this in terms of policing and community relations, and hopefully it's on the uptick at this point. But I've got to tell you, the reaction of the police department, I think everybody is, again, in the same boat. Glad that the charges were dropped, wondering why it took so long. And then ultimately there's a lot of people who are angry that the charges were brought to begin with in the manner with which they were approached. And so, again, there's some silver lining here in terms of equipment and training and a heightened sense of awareness in and around police community relations, but much more damage to repair along the way as a result of this case.
All right, Rob, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this.